Three, two, one, and we're live. Welcome to another episode of Hot Coffee Consulting. I'm joined today by David Nottingham from iPinYou. Happy Chinese New Year, David.
Thank you very much, Miles. It's kind of a funny one. It's like their Christmas.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not Chinese, so it's quite hard for me to get as excited. But thank you very much. It's been great to be able to be here, and Kong Si Fa Choi, I think, is the official way of saying it.
There we go. I'm not going to attempt
I think that's probably very wrong as well. I tried.
So you're going to, I think, help over the next 30 minutes to educate myself about the Chinese market and to talk about exactly what iPinYou is doing in the Chinese market. I think describing you as a gateway to China for programmatic media and data-driven advertising wouldn't be too far from the truth.
Yeah, you've just done my job. So it's pretty amazing actually. In the last couple of years, I've worked very closely with data, like international trading desks, local trading desks, and when you talk to people about their APAC plans, they always say, yeah, we're active in Hong Kong, Singapore, and then you're like kind of missing out one big country, and that's China. So I think one thing that since I've joined iPinYou, my whole horizons of how programmatic works has had to been reset. So from different ways that SSPs or ad exchanges works to the different types of data providers, or to even the way that media is bought is kind of completely different. So when I started iPinYou in London 8 months ago, the whole process has been kind of similar to what we're going to do today, is talk about how big the market is in China, how we kind of worked with China to date from a European standpoint, and what we're kind of doing to try and equal the Chinese standards with the European standards.
Okay, great.
So when I started, it's quite a nice story actually. I was sitting down for lunch with a mate, and he said, if I was to sell one thing in life, it would just be to sell the biggest thing possible. And I was working at a second-party data cooperative at the time. We were doing really well in finding really good data sources, but when we were trying to activate it with trading desks, the scale wasn't big enough. Okay. So one day we randomly met iPinYou in London, and then when we found out they had 900 million mobile IDs in the platform and had access to 24 billion bid requests every day, you kind of saw that there was a real opportunity there. So iPinYou is a advertising and MarTech platform based in Beijing. We started 2008, and over the last decade, we've been building self-serve platforms to allow for brands and agencies to have complete access to the Chinese programmatic ecosystem. So our DSP is called Optimus Prime, which
Very
is
good.
a nice link to Transformers and optimizing, and do you know what I mean? I quite like that. So Optimus itself is completely self-serve. You can also manage it for people who don't have the experience of China. And we're connected to pretty much every single Chinese ad exchanges. We have data partnerships with the likes of Baidu, Alibaba Maps. We have our own proprietary data sets with 6,000 audience labels. And then JD.com. So JD.com is like the second biggest e-commerce platform in China, and we have a direct integration with them.
So from an outsider looking in, are there any non-Chinese businesses, Western businesses, from an ad tech perspective, from a data exchange perspective, that operate within the Chinese market, or is it a completely new and different landscape?
So it's starting. So recently, Trade Desk started accessing a few Chinese ad exchanges. Okay. So they're starting the process, which has been really good for us, basically to give people education that programmatic and whatever type of performance marketing, branding is available through a platform. But then there are a few brand safety vendors. So like IAS are active in China, who we're integrated with. Grapeshot are also integrated into our platform, and they're active in China. So it's starting. And I think it's a really important play for us, just because there's Western standards, so like IAB, which has got its like standard formats, and then there's Chinese formats, which each ad exchange, so all 33 of them, have their own separate formats.
Right. Okay.
So there's over 400 different format sizes you can play with. But they're not always linked up to how the Western market works.
And when I speak to people that have operated in the Chinese marketplace, in programmatic, it seems as though it's quite an advanced ecosystem. And then I think that is contrary maybe to opinion in the Western markets, where we think that the Chinese market, as you said, it's not really part of the plan oftentimes, and I think often we fall for the trap of thinking that anything to the east of the UK essentially is a slower market that is maybe further back in terms of their overall development. So where would you, having experience of both the Chinese market and European markets, where would you place it in terms of the sophistication and the level of programmatic expenditure and the way in which people are working with ad tech and martech?
So the word "the Great Firewall" does my head in, because it's not like it doesn't really exist. It's just the fact that if you look at the programmatic foundations in China, you have Chinese ad servers, so your ad server has to be in China. A lot of brands or agencies work with Google. Google doesn't have full access to China, so things like DV360 or even third-party ad serving doesn't really work unless you are fully set up in China. Once you're in China, it's fine, because again, the whole ecosystem is very similar to what we work with now. What is different though is that you have these very large and very important companies like Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, and like walled gardens in Europe, they have their own standards. Okay. So for example, you can't put a JavaScript tag onto Alibaba or Baidu on the ad exchange. You have to have your own. They built their own specialist JavaScript, which is unique to them. So the way that in Europe we're very sophisticated and lots of different platforms talk to each other, in China there's a lot more legwork in making sure that your technology works with each separate ad exchange and each separate walled garden.
So is it a little bit more manual in the sense that you have to plan out your campaign and the various different partners that you're going to be working with, and to make sure that those different technology solutions, platforms, media, ecosystems are interoperable?
Yeah, 100%. So it's, again, like if you look from like a data standpoint, normally in the UK or Europe, when you're plugging in a data set, it's just a CPM that you just drag and drop. You see the price, you put it in. In China, it's slightly different. You have some data providers which provide you a CPM, which you can just plug and play. But then there are some which are a bit more sophisticated and a bit more bespoke. So JD.com, which is one of our strategic data partnerships, what we do is we have to send them over a set of segments or an audience. They build the segment for us, and then they place it into a line item in the campaign for us to target. That is then unique to that one advertiser for that one campaign, which you pay a singular fee for. So you can't then just use that across multiple other line items. So it's quite a clever way of trading with data, because it means you guarantee your revenue from that audience, but it also means that it's bespoke to what your needs are, which is very much in China a top priority. So when I talk with my teams, when I was first saying, right, sending through media plans, they were like, CTR, why is everyone obsessed with CTR? And I was like, I don't really know, to be honest. I hate the term. Because in China, they're just obsessed with target audience. So it's like, how do you know your target audience? How do you define it? When you think in China, there are, I just get this wrong the whole time, 1.4 billion people. There are 15 cities with over 10 million people in. I can name 3 of them. The whole aspect of this whole ecosystem is bigger than it's bigger than Europe and North America combined. So when you're trying to analyze audiences within that whole kind of huge amount of users, mobile IDs, bid requests, so many different variables, you have to look at the way that you plan and you access your audiences in a different way.
I feel like we maybe need to take a step back.
Yes, I just realised that as well.
Very overly excited, which is my fault, not yours. But maybe if we do take a step back and you can introduce iPinYou and the concept behind the business, and then we'll find another jumping in point.
Yeah, so again, I kind of run off on one sometimes. Yeah, so as I say, iPinYou started 2008, and the whole ethos of the business is to produce a platform that has complete access to the Chinese programmatic ecosystem. So as I said, we've got our DSP, we've also got our DMP, and we've got a content management platform as well. All of those combined together into our lead product now, which is called the Marketing Intelligence Platform, which allows you to align your first, second, third-party data, your CRM data, your offline data. Combine that with our creative management platform, which analyzes all of your creatives, do A/B testing. We've done some really cool projects with some car brands as well, to find out which creators work in different cities and different users based on heat mapping on specific creatives, and then finally executed through the DSP. So as a business, the main focus is on allowing advertisers and agencies to get the most out of their data and to activate it in the most efficient way programmatically.
So it's an end-to-end precision marketing platform. And are your customers mainly customers outside of China that are looking to enter China to advertise across the Chinese market, or are they mainly internal to China?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Again, you look at the size of the market, and we only started the international division 2 years ago. But when you see how much ad spend is in China, there's not much need to go out. There's enough business inside China to focus solely on that. So we work with, I think it's like 93% of all Fortune 500 companies that are active in China. We work with some of the major agencies out there who use our DSP for their programmatic activity. And then, as I say, like when you're working with some very large like FMCG brands or some major global drinks and car providers, we're building these custom solutions for them. So it's like we have a SaaS version, but we've also got, I think, there's about 4 or 5 complete custom DMPs that we created, which takes a lot of work. Because as I'm sure you know, with data comes in so many different forms. The way that each company is set up within their kind of their back end on their data collection and processing means that when you're trying to unify it in a platform, it takes some level of manual.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So you say that you opened the international office a couple of years ago.
Yep.
So clearly there's demand from outside of China to enter into that market, and that is presumably growing very rapidly.
Yes, so I think one of the biggest things that I've been pushing is just complete transparency. So because a lot of the time, just due to standard issues when you have international trade or international kind of operational issues, so like, for example, China, they don't speak English. Everything's in Mandarin. And when you're told that anyway, so it's very difficult for you to activate a plan or to communicate when you don't have a clue what the sites are saying or what the provider does. Do you know what I mean? It's just like a basic.
Yep.
So what we're doing is that by trying to align our platform with the Western standards that you'd see in a normal DSP or DMP through brand verification, through third-party ad serving, to allow people to understand they can plan centrally. So they can actually execute everything that they would do in China, here in London or here in New York or here in Germany. So I think that's the main, and I think it's progressively happening more and more as obviously the market grows and the kind of visibility on the market improves. More and more brands will want to have more control over what they do in the market.
And is iPinYou exclusively focused on the Chinese market, or if you are sitting in a European team, can you plan and buy media inventory that exists outside of China today?
Not yet. So again, we're solely connected with Chinese ad exchanges. So that's where our whole inventory pool is.
Any plans to expand that out? Would that cause issues potentially in terms of the way in which you would work?
I just don't think it's like, as I say, the market's so big. It's like, there's no real demands. I think, we've got to concentrate on China. And also just inbound is really important. And as I say, we're working with some really cool agencies and some really great brands that are wanting to have full access to China programmatically. So I think as that develops, it's obviously important to be able to, as I say, access European SSPs and data exchanges. But as I say, at the moment, it's not really a big plan.
So given the nature of the ecosystem, and you were describing earlier the fact that you need to work with these larger players, Baidu and Tencent, and that they are effectively walled gardens in their own right, how's the programmatic ecosystem developing within China? Do you see a lot of demand for addressable real-time bidding capability, or is there still a lot of direct partnerships with publishers and media owners?
So it's very interesting. So obviously, because they're so powerful and it's so important to be on their platforms, there is still a level of like tenancy ad buys. So you're buying one ad slot on rotation 5 times a day for X amount with limited reporting. But also on the other side, there's demand for, again, performance-driven bidding, real-time bidding in that essence, or creating programmatic direct buys or PMPs. Do you know what I mean? It just varies depending on the platform. And also just like, I think we did for a major fast food chain, we did, I think, one of the biggest buys in our history in December, which was just tenancies across every single major exchange. And if you're trying to say that in like, the way that I try to understand it is that if you're in China and there's a brand awareness campaign, it's like a billboard. You know you're going to be on the biggest sites where everyone looks on. You just got to be there. So it's a bit different in the way that I think the attribution maybe works in Europe. That you want to see measurement on every single unit. In China, it's a bit different, I think.
And in terms of, you mentioned the just magnitude of the country, the landscape, the regional differences. Do you have to think very differently? South versus north of China, west versus east. Different cities, as you mentioned, have very large and scalable populations in their own right. Are there cultural differences that you need to take into consideration when you're planning out a campaign and when you're looking to acquire inventory, or is it fairly standard across the country at large?
I think it's pretty disparate. So you've obviously got the tier 1 cities, so like your Shanghai's, Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, where obviously it's like very high net worth. They're like the leading cities where all the business finance is there. So obviously those audiences are quite similar to like how you plan in London or Paris and New York. But then you have like other cities that I don't even know the names of, but they've got, as I say, 15, 10 million people. They don't have perfect 3G access, so they might only be 2G, which might mean that the type of ads that you serve them have to vary based on the kind of the infrastructure that supports them. So again, within the platform itself, there's so many different variables that you'd only really know if you were Chinese, to be fair. So I think this is one thing that our team in London are doing with the partners that are going self-serve, is trying to really emphasize to them, you can control it all, you can do all the buying, but you do need someone who knows about China.
Yeah.
Because as I said, it's very different. And when you're talking about that many people and how big your spend could be, you also could get very lost. And I think this is something that happens quite often when you hear about people working with certain platforms. It's like, okay, we'll do WeChat, but there's so much going on WeChat. Do you know what I mean? There's so much spend going through it, and you could very easily get lost unless you're completely set up. I think, as you say, leading on to the question before, like knowing about China, one of the main things that I've had to say to all of our clients is, if you want to advertise in China, there's a lot of back-end operational procedures and setup that your business has to have gone through already to be able to activate there. So you obviously know that the Chinese internet is managed or censored in an essence. But what's amazing about it is that it is a great way of being able to have control over who advertises. So when we set up a campaign, we have to show that each brand that's advertising, we have to show their business license, we have to show that they've got official licenses to actually be able to trade in China. So to have complete verification of who they are and what they're selling, which is a really nice thing, because in Europe you don't really have that. With all of the kind of fake news, like who are these people, kind of what happened with Facebook and so on, in China that's not allowed. So you have to submit this documentation to every ad exchange, and they have to approve you.
Does that happen on the supply side if you're a new publisher? Presumably if it is a managed and controlled environment, you may have, or you may expect to have more control over the inventory that's actually made available to advertisers. Do you see the same kinds of issues? I mean, you said that IAS is operating in the market, presumably from a viewability perspective, but also potentially from a fraud perspective. Do you see the same kinds of issues with fraud and those types of things?
Yeah, obviously. But it is censored in a way, so certain types of content won't be listed. I think, so obviously IAS and Grapeshot, they both have pre-bid brand safety, which is really good, and it's a nice way to kind of alleviate any stress that Western clients would potentially feel. But in China, as a publisher, you have to get an ICP license. So it's an internet content provider, which basically states that your website lists has been verified, and you won't be able to join major ad exchanges without this license.
And it's really interesting to hear you talk about the difference, maybe from one region to the next in terms of their access, 2G versus 3G. And you mentioned at the very beginning the mobile device footprint. Is it mostly a mobile first market?
It's massive. It's unbelievable. So I think one of our data providers, Asia Info, so there's like a mobile carrier provider, so it's like Vodafone or O2. They've got something like 1.2 billion mobile devices within their DMP. And then if you compare, so even within our platform, we're slowly reducing the amount of bid requests we get or that we accept from desktop, just because it's not really used that much.
So it is a predominantly mobile market.
Yeah, it's mad. And even performance-wise, it's just so much better on mobile. Especially when you work a bit closer with apps, and when we work closer with brands who have apps, being able to do the data passbacks between, so we've done an integration with AppsFlyer, so any e-commerce partners that we have, to be able to share the data within the app to then what we have within the platform, to then do lookalike modeling, it's amazing. So as I say, it's very mobile first.
And what about the data ecosystem specifically? So how does that operate? Do you have access to what we would consider to be third-party data providers in China, or is it mostly accessed through second-party data sources, some of the larger players that you were mentioning earlier? Yeah,
so I guess the definition of second and third is a bit, because so we do have, I wouldn't say there's much third-party data. Like within our platform itself, so we have our own DAAT segment, so this is 6,000 individual audience labels, built from all of the activity across the DSP. I'd say that in essence is a bit third party, but again, the majority of the integrations we have with like the Baidu DMP, JD DMP, and the mobile carrier DMPs, again, that's probably more second party.
And presumably iPinYou isn't operating in isolation. Do you have many competitors? Is it quite an active environment from a DSP, DMP perspective?
Yeah, massively. So there's a lot of, as I say, I think we're there's a couple that are active in Europe, but again, our USP is that we're completely self-serve. So again, the whole kind of providing complete access to it versus a managed buy, where there's not as much transparency. I think that's the kind of major differentiator that we have, and also the strategic relationships we develop. But no, there are a lot of DSPs in China, and all of them have their own USPs. But as I say, I don't really care about them.
Well, something that's quite interesting and aligns to, I think, a couple of conversations that I've had with some of my other guests is it seems like, particularly with a self-service model, there is this need, and specifically in the case of iPinYou operating in a market that is for many people an unknown, to have a consultancy-based approach to supporting your advertisers and your agencies and your clients as a whole, because not only do you need to educate them as to the capability of the technology and the platform and how they can leverage that solution to the best of its abilities, but also you need to have an approach to be able to advise and to guide your advertisers and your clients on the market, the regions, the different cities, the different cultures, the different languages, the different ways in which people access various different media properties and the ecosystem in general. So do you approach the market and your clients from a fairly consultative perspective?
Yeah, massively. I felt for the first 6 months I was kind of a Chinese ambassador. So again, just doing like geography lessons, like cultural lessons. But no, I think for us the main thing is that agencies and brands, they know their campaigns and know their strategy better than we do. So all we can do is advise them on best partners, best kind of, as I say, best approaches. But I think with the whole self-serve offering is being able to have that capability to have complete control in-house. I think some of the way that also media buys have happened in China in the past is that you have to pay up front sometimes, and you don't always get access to the reporting that you'd want traditionally or you'd accept from Western media buys. So again, by trying to align that and giving that control back to the agencies and clients has been really important to us.
And in terms of the international market, the non-China market, where do you see the big growth potential for iPinYou, but also more generally? Do you see it in Europe and North America? Do you see it across the rest of Asia Pacific, ANZ, maybe LATAM? Where are you seeing most demand?
So we've had a very successful last 6 months in London and in Europe. I think, again, because I've taken more of an agency approach to begin with, and because a lot of media is planned globally from London or Germany or Paris, there's been a real desire for Chinese inventory and Chinese audiences. However, I do know as well that Russia is another very big market because they have quite a similar programmatic ecosystem that isn't completely accessible by some Western providers. That again, being able to integrate the two is quite a good option. But I think our clients are all over the place. To be honest, we've got campaigns running in Mexico, so Singapore, Australia. I was just in Prague the other week for a great marketing conference for China, and I think they're the fourth most visited location by Chinese people in Europe. So you have like London, Paris, Milan, then Prague. And just the desire and the need to be able to attract those travelers is so massive, it's so important to local brands. So I think it's kind of a unique story for each geo or each market, but it's all there.
So in terms of the profile and the makeup of those clients, where is the major focus? Is it tourism? Is it CPG? Is it automotive, technology? Is it a good mix of all of the above?
Yeah, so like obviously it varies from client to client, and also how marketing spend is allocated. So obviously a lot of agencies or brands have a Chinese specific agency that will deal with all of their inbound, but then some clients will also have access to budget to be able to spend on people in the UK. So obviously travel for a lot of luxury brands is really important. But on the other side, you've got e-coms, which is just huge. So obviously, you have Alibaba, and then you have their B2C platform called Tmall, where on Singles Day, which I'm sure you might have heard of, it's like the biggest shopping event in the world. So I think it's like 25 billion USD was spent this year on one day on one platform. So when you look at it like that, and you look at a lot of European brands being like, right, okay, I need to tap into that market, whatever's going on with Brexit or whatever's going on with any geopolitical issues. If you can have an effective e-commerce strategy where you have a fulfillment partner that can sell or send out your orders or whatever, it's a great place to be. So we've had some real interest on that side.
And I suppose a lot of this is based on the fact that the economic situation in China has developed significantly over the past 2 decades, that we do have a burgeoning middle class now in the Chinese market that have disposable income, that are able to purchase what would have been considered a decade or so ago to be luxury products. And so that I assume has had a big impact just in terms of the market, the disposable income, GDP per capita, all of those things I think would have had a huge impact on the ability or the ROI, I suppose, for a particular advertiser to enter into that ecosystem.
Yeah, it's amazing. So there's this, you often see a lot of Chinese tourists in, I just told a story the other day about, there's like queues of Chinese retail tourists in Switzerland or Lucerne just queuing outside specific watch shops because they wanted to be able to buy a shop from Switzerland, from the official store. Do you know what I mean? So that kind of, it's called the Veblen effect. So it's like an irrational buy that doesn't equal the cost of the actual good. So but you get the external pleasure from just saying, listen, I bought it from Lucerne, from the shop. So it's like going to Burberry in London and keeping the price tag on, saying this is from the London store. So yeah, so it's amazing. And again, the development of things like WePay and Alipay, of how easy it is to purchase immediately through your phone is just incredible, because the speed or like the user journey, there's just no delay.
And things like that then. So obviously we have that in the UK, but it doesn't seem to be currently adopted at the levels that I believe, or at least I've heard that it's being adopted in China. So there are significant differences in the way in which people transact and purchase different products. Is it, is that just one example, or are there other examples of the way in which people go about their day-to-day lives using technology that would be considered to be quite different from, how we may interact with technology on a day-to-day basis in the UK or in France or in Germany?
Yeah, I think it's just how a lot of these companies, like, as you say, WeChat, they've really developed from just a messaging tool to a complete service provider. So being able to offer, as you say, payment, sending gifts, so money to each other, to be able to interact with brands, it's completely different. So it's very sophisticated. And so as I think a lot of these providers, it's becoming more service-based than your traditional, as I say, just like messaging platforms. But no, it's obviously a lot of it's being integrated into what we can do now, but you can imagine like WhatsApp being able to get your pay or buy a house on there. It's we're not really at that point yet.
Not at that level.
No.
And I was going to ask a question, but it's completely gone from my mind. I'm so interested in this in this conversation. So actually, what I was going to ask, with a foot in both camps, essentially, where do you see the innovation around advertising technology and data-driven advertising coming in the next 5 years? If you had to vote one way or the other, China versus the rest of the world, European markets, US markets, where would you say that innovation is going to come?
So there's a lot of keywords that you probably hear buzzing around from everyone, either what's it called, big data, AI,
blockchain, AI,
all this kind of stuff. It's like, anyway, one thing that they have in China is that there's a lot of data. So there is a lot of analysis. There's a lot of capabilities to produce algorithms that define, like audience analysis or improved development of actual strategy. That I think, from what I've seen from iPinYou so far, especially in the marketing intelligence platform, is amazing. So being able to analyze more effectively what type of media you're buying, what type of audiences reacting with media, and then connecting the whole full circle ecosystem from data collection and content creation to delivery. And I think being able to combine those three together is a much more intelligent way than kind of siloing it, as might be the case here, because I think from what I understand is that obviously the China market is developing so quickly, and from in Europe, from what my understanding in Europe is, you have certain providers will just kind of specialize on one thing. So it might be we're a DSP or we're a DMP or we're, do you know what I mean? So a single part of the stack, from my understanding. But it seems in China that like everyone, so Baidu have developed a DMP, Baidu have developed a DSP. Everyone is being able to tap into the same level of resources and understanding to develop kind of a one-stop shop within their own product to execute all types of buys.
So they've gone directly into having end-to-end, full stack, full spectrum capability, as opposed to, as you said, what we saw here for a very long time was specialism towards one particular part of the ad tech ecosystem. And we have, over time, seen businesses develop a more full spectrum approach. You have the likes of Adform, Nielsen Marketing Cloud, Raj in here last week explaining their approach that covered technology, data, and measurement. But yeah, I would agree that for the most part, the focus initially, it seems, in the Western markets was to specialize, land, and then expand. But if what you say is true, it's far more focused on a full stack approach from the very beginning of the process.
Yeah, and I think it's like in a lot of the case of what, in order to succeed, you need to have, so especially when you're working with a brand directly, the more access to more data touch points you have, the more effective, well, the bigger picture, the better visibility you have on their audiences and where their business needs to go. So I think that is, in the sense, the way of having the end-to-end product is really useful. And
I guess just for journalistic completeness, I'm probably going to have people watch this and say, well, look, this is the Chinese market. You've got a quasi-communist dictatorship. You've got a controlled market. It's very difficult to operate. It's not particularly free. Do you see any of that enter into the way in which you work? Does it impinge upon potential opportunities? What's a candid take on the political ecosystem?
I don't have very much access to it because I'm in London. But the team that I work with are a bit amazing in terms of, it's not so much the case that from what I understand, it impinges. It's just there are processes you follow, and as I say, like when you're setting up a campaign, there are certain procedures you have to adhere to, which certain decisions might be made that are in the better fulfillment, or it's for the best need of the users or the Chinese consumers. So, as I say, I don't really have much access to it, but from everything I see, it's completely transparent. There's no, as I say, I'm not there to be able to comment.
Well, look, I think what's really interesting is that to the extent that they have freed up their political economic system to allow for more free market competition, to allow for the introduction of new businesses, new technologies, new capabilities. Obviously, they've had a huge amount of success and they've generated wealth and opportunity for not only the people in China, but clearly the people outside of China. So I'm going to close it out in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Any final thoughts? Do you have any events, anything that you'd like to discuss, anything coming up?
So I think we're about to do a few, the whole, we're about to go on a little conference tour. So we were at Mexico last year. We've done a few conferences lined up, which is really exciting. I think the most important thing for us, as I say, is it's still very educational. So we're trying to educate the market on how to access and what you can and can't do in China programmatically. So for us, as I say, it's just a real big, like talking to you today and being able to potentially interact with your readership and your listeners. It's just, as I say, this wider education piece and really getting people to understand what they can and can't do in China.